We back then to talk about languages and traveling. Conor is now joining us on the studio. Conor is an avid traveler, languages fan, and he just joined us on the studio. Conor, you're an avid traveler, YouTuber, languages learner. You're a lawyer, very busy lawyer, based in Brussels. But people probably wondering, how do you have time to travel and learn languages, with a very busy life as you do have?
Yeah, that's true. It's a question I'm often asked. Thanks very much for inviting me here today, Nelvino. It's great to see you again.
Спасибо
большое. Muito obrigado. Yeah, I mean, my lifestyle is, working quite hard and then taking the advantage of any sort of break I have, like weekends or my holidays or time I take off, to travel and explore new places, learn languages. What I do when I'm, say, based in one place is I do my best to speak and maintain as many of the languages as possible. So that might involve me, speaking to friends every day who live in other countries, or maybe there's something also you can do here in London because it's quite multinational in terms of its composition as a city. Maybe just before I came in today, I went and had a coffee across the street in your Italian cafe, Il Molino, and I just chat a little bit in Italian with the staff there. So this is something you can always do to maintain your languages when you're not traveling. But I always take advantage of the time I have off. I mean, in Europe today with low-cost airlines, it's not a very, very expensive normally to travel if you plan a little bit ahead and pick locations based on what you want to see, what could be interesting, what could be new, and then looking for good connections. So even for the weekend, I've always tried to take as many of them on the go.
Let's try to build up this incredible travel and languages story. So you were born in Ireland. Normally, British people don't learn language. We will delve on this topic later on. But you actually managed to learn more than 7, 9. It's not important, the number. But let's try to build up this. You started learning language and traveling with Erasmus, right?
Exactly. So to explain to your listeners what Erasmus is, it's a European wide university exchange program, right? So you have this has also been kind of immortalized a little bit in cinema with L'Auberge Espagnole, which was a film that came out maybe about 10 years ago, and Les Poupées Russes, I think, was the sequel, which it was set on an Erasmus year abroad in Barcelona. So basically, students go from their home university, so that would be here in Britain, and they go to a country where they're interested in learning the language normally or learning about the culture, and they spend 1 year there in addition to their academic studies in their home country. So it's for me, it was a great experience. It was a bit of a catalyst for my language learning and traveling. I went to France, and not only did I learn French while I was there, I also traveled a lot around in the neighboring countries. So I took advantage of my location in France, went to Italy, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, a few other countries nearby. And this then provided kind of the impetus for my later traveling. It was really a watershed moment going in Erasmus. So I encourage all your listeners who are maybe considering the option to go and do it. Just pick a country, a language, and go for it.
So you went to France to study. There you learned French. Then you went back to Ireland. You spent some time in Netherlands, where you didn't become fluent in Dutch.
Not at the time. Basically, I went after my undergraduate studies to study a master's through English in the Netherlands. I did learn basic Dutch when I was there, and then I came back to it later on when I lived nearby in Belgium, where almost a little bit more than half the country speaks Dutch as their native tongue. So I went to the Netherlands. After that, I had a 2-year master's program. The first year was in Italy. I was obviously studying law since I'm a lawyer. And then I also studied international relations at Johns Hopkins University. So I spent the first year in Italy, and then I went to the States. And actually, my language learning just kind of built up from that. I mean, I traveled quite a lot on my weekends, on the time in between university during the summer. And when I lived in the States, I lived in Washington, D.C., the capital, and there's a very big El Salvadorian community in Washington, D.C., so I actually lived right beside a Salvadorian neighborhood. So every day I would go and speaking Spanish, which I was started to learn at the time when I was there. So there was always opportunities to learn languages, build relationships with people from different countries in a big cosmopolitan city. I mean, London is perfect.
In Washington D.C., you actually was exposed to Swahili, to French, to Italian, to Spanish.
Exactly. I had my favorite cafe, which was near to my university, and I mean, every day the staff there, they were pretty cool. I got on very, very well with them, and they came from El Salvador, from Tanzania, from Burkina Faso, which is in West Africa, and so I spoke every day in Spanish and French, and then I learned a little bit of Swahili at the time because the East African guys all spoke Swahili. So.
It seems that the countries are connected to the language that you learn, but you're English speaker, and you coincidence start learning Spanish in US.
You don't need to go to the country where it's an official language, for example. Here in London, you can learn any language, I guess, you want to, if there's communities from all the different major language groups living right here in London. So you could go, and if you live nearby, go for your coffee in the morning. That's actually, since you're a native Portuguese speaker, I actually learned Portuguese when I was living in Brussels later on. And every morning on my way to the office, I used to stop purposefully at a Portuguese cafe, where all the local Portuguese immigrants used to go for their morning coffee, and that's how I kind of started. People, they thought I was a little bit strange, right? Like I'd come in and I spoke in pidgin Portuguese in the beginning, but after a month or two, they thought, oh, it's cool. He comes in every day, he chats to us, and they were more than delighted to speak to me in Portuguese every morning. So I had a little bit of a Portuguese language lesson over 10 minutes of my coffee every morning.
I'm fascinated by the people that can talk as many languages as they do, and it also do you think it actually impacts on your English? Because listening to you actually don't sound like English is your first language. You almost sound like you're speaking it as a second language. How has that? Do you think that has actually affected that? Because it sounds, you don't sound Irish at all. You don't have an Irish accent. You sound more American, if anything, or even maybe more Spanish American.
Okay, well, that changes, I guess, depending a little bit on where I am and where I'm speaking, who I'm speaking to. Yeah, definitely probably impacts on that. I learned to slow down. I never had a very strong Irish accent. Mm-hmm. My Irish brogue was pretty light in the beginning. But definitely, if you're switching languages, having to speak maybe in English to people who don't speak as their first language, and you have to make yourself understood, especially professionally, I've probably learned to enunciate my words a lot clearer than it would have been when I was before I started traveling. So that's definitely true. My own family make fun of me, so I'm well used to being told that English is not I don't sound like a native English speaker. Even when I arrive in the airport in Dublin, they ask me where am I really from. So
yeah, actually we were talking about this because I was a bit confused, because I know that the Irish accent is quite slightly similar to American, or America has a bit of the Irish accent, and Asker, you said no, I sound more American. And because we talk about America, it was probably because of your language skills that you actually got an amazing experience in US. You were an intern for the Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, that's right. I interned for at the time Senator Clinton at the Senate, in her Senate office. That was really amazing as an experience. A very clever woman. And we had a lot of interesting conversations at the time about different geopolitical issues that the U.S. was facing. And I used to go to the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations quite frequently and meet with the other senators who were interested in foreign relations, foreign affairs on the U.S. side. So it was really great. And there I also used my Spanish quite a bit, because I used to go to meetings where a lot of the politicians or the people who were wanting to meet with them spoke Spanish, so it was always useful, even there in the U.S., in the Senate, to speak Spanish. That was really cool.
So in America, you're studying international relation. I hope I'm not wrong. You specialize in former Soviet Union.
Exactly. That's why I took my specialization within IOR, international relations, so strategic studies, and the former Soviet Union, or the new Eurasia, actually they call it, to give it a different nuance. So that's when I first got interested in the former Soviet Union. So I had never actually been there at the time when I took it, but I was really interested. I started learning some Russian at the time. I took a semester while I was there in Russian, and then when I returned to Europe later on, I made a big point of going to the region and traveling around it and really getting to know the different parts of it. So that was kind of the impetus or the root of my interest in the former Soviet Union.
I actually witnessed how fluent you are in Russian. And that doesn't mean that I'm actually an expert, but you are my guide in Moldova and in Odessa when we actually traveled together in Moldova and Ukraine, because you're passionate about Ukraine, and today we're talking about Ukraine. We're going for a little break with the music, and then we come back and delve on actually Ukraine and Moldova, and you share the tips with us how to explore actually this part of
My pleasure, yeah.
All right.
I got the blast on. Let's go.
We're listening to What About Us? We're listening to What About Us? So today it's all about Moldova and Ukraine languages, and we have actually probably the best guest to talk about this. Conor, we on the first part of the show we're talking about the fact that you got interested in the former Soviet Union, and you actually an expert. I would consider an expert on that part of the era, because normally people are a bit reluctant to travel to the Eastern world, especially during this period that Ukraine was going through revolution. But you somehow very passionate about Moldova and Ukraine. Where it's coming? Where this passion is coming from?
Yeah, having studied international relations when I was in the States, and especially with a specialization in the region, I guess the reason what might put a lot of people off going to Ukraine and Moldova at the moment with the conflict in the east of Ukraine is actually a reason for me to go there, because I'm so interested in the region politically. So when Maidan started, I actually had already scheduled to go to Donetsk, which is the city where there is, which is controlled by separatists, Russian-backed separatists at the moment. So I flew there during the Maidan protests and traveled to some of the cities in the east, also to Kiev, and saw what was going on in Maidan. And then later on in February 2014, when the protests were at their peak, I was in Greece actually on business, and a friend of mine, a British friend who has a business in Kiev, wrote to me and said, "Yeah, you should really come now. The protests seem to be at a pivotal point in the kind of confrontation with the government." So I flew. I just basically on my phone I booked a flight and left 3 hours later via Istanbul to Kiev, and it was quite adventurous. I met a very cool war photographer actually on the plane, a Swiss guy, and so I brought him to the square, to the protests, and then he took a lot of amazing photos that day with the confrontation. So definitely it's something that I guess what puts other people off actually attracts me to a certain point, because it's what I studied, and I really enjoyed being in the region previously when I was traveling there. So obviously it's a good opportunity to speak, practice, maintain my Russian, because in Ukraine most people can either speak Russian as a first language or a second language, right? The majority speak Ukrainian as a first language, and in Moldova the majority speak Romanian as their first language, but almost everybody also speaks a very high level of Russian, so it can be used as a lingua franca when you travel there. I think when you probably realized when you came to Moldova and to Ukraine that you do speak a little bit of Russian, but it's quite difficult to travel around if you rely on English, for example. Not so many people, we'll say over the age of 25, are going to speak that much English. Younger people definitely are learning more English than in the past, but Russian as a language really gives you a great entry into meeting local people and understanding the culture a lot more than if you rely on English. That's for sure.
So it's a country more like to go for discovering. You have to be. You can't really be picky because you have to be open-minded because it's a challenge. Because even for me, my Russian is basic. Thanks for that, but I do go more for instinct. The fact that I speak different languages allowed me to understand the Russians, but it's very challenging. Because you normally say that even with good stories, you have good time. You've been traveling on that part of the world for 5 years, but you still can't convince people to go travel. And for me, it was pretty easy. When I spoke to you in Berlin, I was straight away convinced that it was a place to go because I believe that you were like kind of similar to me. Where people don't want to go, you actually feel attracted to. Why do you think most of your friends or people you talk to still, even though you have good stories to share, they're still a bit reluctant?
Yeah, because it's the unknown, right? It's not something that they have, I guess, peer validation for having traveled to. I think today, traveling to Central Europe is pretty much standard. Most people would feel comfortable going to Prague, to Warsaw. Budapest is very popular. And that wasn't the case maybe in the early 90s. And it's just there's a lot more familiarity with the region. And it caters probably to Western European tourism a lot more than it did in the past. Ukraine and Russia, Belarus, Moldova don't really cater to the Western style tourism in the sense that they don't promote themselves very much in the West as a travel destination. English is not that widely spoken. There isn't the history of going there, for example, from like we would say going to France or Italy, which are not just closer, but also they're kind of more since the 19th century. British aristocrats have been going on this grand tour of Europe, right? So it didn't include those countries. So it's a little bit more of an unknown destination, and then people are reluctant to jump in. People are not so adventurous. So yeah, you're right. I have a hard time convincing people that they should come with me, but that's fine. I don't mind going with like-minded adventurers like yourself, Nelvino. So
yeah, it was
we had a cool time.
Yeah, we did indeed have. So I'm not probably the right person because you, the guest today. So I should ask you, how would you describe first Moldova in order to convince people to go there? How do you say? I found it pretty organic and I love it. That's the only thing I can say.
It depends on your taste. Moldova? If you want to, go to a country that's going to have less tourism, right, and want to travel, people are very, very friendly and welcoming. That's in both countries. I'd say in Ukraine and Moldova. And Moldova, as you said, has great wine. I think that's one of the best assets of the country. They have these amazing cellars in the vineyards that go on for hundreds of kilometers. One of them, Krikovo as well is another one that's quite well known as a wine. So you have that. The viticulture is very strong. They have some really beautiful monasteries that you can go and visit. It doesn't have the seaside. That's actually in Ukraine, the nearby seaside. And then Ukraine itself, it has quite a bit more diverse. It's quite a big country, so the center and east will be very architecturally. It's very influenced by its time in the Soviet Union. So very what we would maybe describe as Stalinistic buildings, communist buildings from after Stalin's era. And then you have Odessa in the south, which was built only 220 years ago, and it's very influenced by Italian and Austrian architecture because they were the architects who came to build a lot of the important buildings in the city. Lviv in the very west of Ukraine was part of Poland for a long time, so it looks very Polish as a city. So maybe similar to what you would find in Krakow, for example. It's a very different feel. There's definitely a very different feel overall to being once you enter the former Soviet Union compared to what would have been in the Warsaw Pact bordering it, right? So it's definitely very distinct. It's different. I don't think it's for everybody to go traveling to. You need to be a little bit more daring to go there and maybe give up some of the comforts and the easiness of traveling in maybe Central Europe. But I think it's definitely, for me, more enriching to go there. And I actually feel very comfortable there. I've never had a problem. I've never had anyone try to, say, rob me, or I have very few negative experiences in all my travels there.
Chisinau is considered the safest capital in Europe. Moldova, considered one of the safest country. I don't know whole Moldova, but Chisinau is definitely considered one of the safest.
That doesn't surprise me. It's not dangerous to walk around at night. I've never had any problems. So, yeah. Actually, in Ukraine either, I've never had, as I said, any problems with walking around late at night. No one's ever hassled me or anything. So I feel pretty secure there as I walk around.
We had a guy, because we probably have lots of women listening to Wandsworth Radio, where the guy said that safe country is judged by the way a woman walks on the street by 3 a.m. And that was actually a guy from Rwanda who said that, because Rwanda is considered one of the safest places in Africa. And I told the same. When I was in Moldova, in Chisinau, walking at 3 a.m, a woman who come towards me, they wouldn't divert, they even ignore me. They feel pretty safe, never feel I was a threat for them. So that's actually a good sign that Moldova is pretty safe. People are very welcoming. The wine is very good, though you have a feeble tourism infrastructure is non-existent actually. But that's probably the best because it's so organic. You don't have to have everything on places where you can actually say, I'm going there to get the information, I'm going there to change the money. It's all sort of, I would say organic is the best way to
I understand what
it.
you mean. I mean, I think today when you travel, my best friend is my smartphone, because I can find all the information I need with a geolocation specific. Just with my smartphone, I always buy a local SIM card. That's the first thing, so I can use the data packages without spending like a fortune. Like if you roam, obviously, because Moldova is outside the EU, so it would be very expensive if you were to roam with your British SIM card. But once you have a local one, it's pretty economical, and then you can find everything you want. You don't need to go to tourist information in general. You can just put it into Wikipedia and whatever.
Because you're a languages fan, let's swap to the topic of languages. You enjoy all this because you're fluent in different language. Otherwise, you'd be able to. We know that the main thing about learning a language is to be able to communicate with people. What's wrong about learning languages in the UK?
Well, statistically, in the past 20 years, the study of foreign languages at universities and in schools has dropped considerably. I actually don't see that as such a big crisis, because I learned most of my languages after university, so outside of an academic setting. And once you're self-directed in terms of your learning, you learn a lot quicker in general anyways. So and the British are not actually the country in Europe, in the EU, that speaks the least number of foreign languages, statistically overall either. I think going forward, showing British students especially the value of learning foreign languages is key to promoting and encouraging and getting them to learn a lot more. So it's always helped me in my career, the different languages that I've spoken. So professionally it helped a lot, either because I could move to other countries for a job that suited me better, or maybe had a higher salary than staying in an English-speaking country. And also when I travel, I have really enriching experiences because I have this window into the local culture. You don't have to speak the language fluently. You just have to be able to speak it enough past the normal courtesies, I think, to be able to really start to get into it. And that will give you the motivation to go on and learn the language to a higher level. Because once you get some sort of feeling of reward for your efforts of having started in the language, it will motivate you to keep going. You need some sort of, quid pro quo when you're putting in time to learning something to feel like it's worth it. So I think that's key, to explain to British students that not everywhere speaks English when you travel. So that's very important for a place like Moldova or Russia or Belarus, Ukraine, for example, and that they can really get something, some value out of having learned them to the medium to long term.
Do you think it's political? Because the fact that Brits only speak English, they confined to just read things in English, newspaper, TV. They consume just the British TV and American. Do you think it's political to keep people a bit isolated? Because the UK is already isolated because it's an island. Do you think in terms of politics, they want to keep them a bit I wouldn't say ignorant, but
I don't think that it's. I don't know what the motivation. If it's something deliberate or something just that happens as a result of the UK being basically an island and English being the international language at the moment. But I definitely think it's something that is a disadvantage for people, especially if there's like a big political issue that's international. The fact that you're dependent on your own local media, no matter where you are, it's not just in Britain, it could also be in the US, in Russia, in France, in Spain, in Germany. It's if you only rely on one media, you only get one viewpoint in general, and this is quite a disadvantage to understanding real issues. So, for example, at the moment, there's a separatist movement in Catalonia. I can read Catalan. So every morning when I wake up, I read the Spanish language media, which is based in Madrid, and then I also read the Catalan media based in Catalonia and Barcelona. And then I get both points of view, and it allows me to kind of weigh up both sides of the story better that I would get if I only spoke one of the languages.
All right, so really quick, future travel languages plans.
So in 2016, I'm going to start learning Swedish, and I will travel to Sweden during the summer and spend a little bit of time there. I always love Sweden as a country, very welcoming people, and a beautiful place, lots of nature, and some nice cities like Stockholm and Gothenburg I really enjoyed being in. So that's going to be my plan directly in 2016. 2015 I learned Irish because I had it at school, but didn't, like a lot of my fellow countrymen, didn't speak it really at all, so I've really made a lot of progress this year. And then going forward, I'd also like to go to India to travel for a considerable amount of time. I have some family history in India that I'd like to go, and see where they were and maybe learn Hindi. We'll see what happens going forward.
I'm surprised you're not mentioning Criollo from Cape Verde. I heard you were going to Cape Verde. You learned to learn, but unfortunately it's not for 2016. So if you're out there listening to Wandsworth Radio and you think that the fact that you're English speaker, you can't learn language, just let you know that Conor, English speaker, Richard Simcott, Ollie Richard,
Alex Rawlings,
Alex, and Simon who is now in Wales. They all speak more than 10 languages, and even Simon's, I think, speak 30 languages, and they all English speakers from the UK and actually learn the languages. Thank you very much, Conor, for being here with us and all about Moldova and Ukraine.
My pleasure, Nelvino.
Spasiba.
Muito prazer.
Prazer foi todo meu. Abraço.
So we're going to...
Wandsworth Radio.
If you fancy being in touch with Conor Klein, you can visit his website www.languagezar.com, and you can follow him on YouTube, on Instagram and on Twitter. If you fancy adventuring with me, you can visit my travel blog, thetraveladventure.com. Please stay tuned with Wandsworth Radio.